As the crisp January air settles over London, the political storm brews stronger by the day. Welcome back to Outspoken, where we remain ever watchful, as always, observing from the other side of the debate. On this 14th of January, as the streets of London bustle with a mixture of anticipation and discontent, a certain figure stands in the center of a political whirlwind: Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. The world has watched as his term has transformed the city, for better or for worse, depending on your viewpoint. Yet, it is his latest moves that have drawn the sharpest of criticisms, especially from those who find themselves on the other side of the political aisle. "Imagine if I were Donald Trump," muses a political commentator, pacing back and forth in his cramped office. "I'd be looking at London and saying, I'm not having that man in my country, no way." It's not even a matter of political preference anymore, it's about the very survival of a national identity. His voice sharpens with each word, as the rhetorical battle between ideologies grows more intense. The politician on the other side of the aisle, however, smiles knowingly. "You know," he says, looking up from the papers on his desk, "it's the sort of thing you laugh off, but the ramifications are massive." Indeed, the battle lines between Khan and his critics have grown so defined that they seem to have become a symbol of the larger ideological war that rages across the UK, and even internationally. Khan, who built his political career on promises of diversity and inclusivity, has begun to stand accused of dividing rather than uniting. The very concept of diversity, once celebrated as London's greatest strength, now feels like a paradox under Khan's leadership. "Diversity, you say?" laughs another commentator, sipping his tea as he flicks through a magazine. Well, don't tell that to the people living in London who feel increasingly alienated in their own city. Not long ago, Khan took to Instagram to boast about the city's embrace of diversity. "Here in London," he wrote, "we respect, celebrate, and embrace our diversity." The photo accompanying his post, however, raised more questions than it answered. A quick glance at the image reveals a crowd of people, but the diversity Khan so enthusiastically claims to celebrate appears almost entirely absent. "Now, tell me this," the commentator continues, leaning forward, his tone growing more incredulous. "Where's all the diversity you're going on about, Sadiq? You can barely see a single white face in that crowd, and what's that? A forehead hiding in the corner? Let's be honest here, mate, diversity is just a word for him now. It's lost all meaning." The irony, as is often the case in politics, is palpable. For years, London was considered a melting pot of cultures, races, and traditions. But under Khan's stewardship, the city, once a beacon of cultural harmony, now seems to stand at the edge of a precipice, its very identity being questioned by both its citizens and outsiders. "But hold on," one of Khan's defenders interjects, shaking his head. "You've got to understand, diversity isn't just about the surface. It's about fostering a sense of community. It's about making sure everyone has a voice." "Fostering a sense of community," retorts a voice from the opposition, his eyebrows raised. "When was the last time you walked down the street in London without feeling like your personal safety was at risk? That's not the city I remember. It's turned into a battleground." He pauses, then adds with a wry smile, "I remember a time when the biggest threat was a bad cuppa, not being mugged on your way home from the office." Indeed, this sense of alienation in London has reached a breaking point. For many, Khan's political approach has led to not just a sense of discomfort, but also a genuine fear for their safety. The city, once renowned for its vibrancy and cultural melting pot, is now experiencing rising crime rates, and it seems as though the system is unable, or unwilling, to cope with the problem. In fact, the police force, once a symbol of law and order, now seems more concerned with policing online opinions than actual street crime. "It's a joke," says another critic, shaking his head. "You can walk through the streets of London, watch the violence unfold before your eyes, and what does the police do? They're more worried about some cheeky tweet than about stopping a gang of hooded youths robbing people blind." As the camera zooms in on the discussion, one critic raises a fascinating point. "If you want to talk about diversity, let's talk about how the native population of London feels. It's all well and good to claim that diversity means a city free from discrimination, but what about the people who were born and raised here? What about them?" The question hangs in the air, unanswered for a moment, as everyone in the room knows just how contentious this issue is. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, another storm is brewing. As Khan continues to vocalize his disdain for Donald Trump, the former president's team has reportedly begun discussing the possibility of a travel ban for Khan. Now, let's consider this, says another commentator, his voice laced with sarcasm. Wouldn't that be the ultimate irony? Khan, who has spent so much of his time trying to shame Trump, now facing the possibility of being banned from entering the United States. You couldn't script this stuff. The critics don't stop there. As they delve deeper into Khan's past, they uncover links that raise eyebrows. You have to wonder, one says, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, about his history. I mean, let's not forget that Khan, back when he was just a human rights lawyer, was tied to some of the most controversial figures in the political world. Take, for example, his association with Louis Farrakhan, a man whose views on race and religion have been described as nothing short of extremist. The others in the room nod in agreement. Yet Khan defended him, even campaigned to have him enter the UK, despite his notorious views on Jews and white people. And you can't ignore the fact that he actively opposed the extradition of people like Barbara Mahdi, who was later convicted of terrorist offenses. It's no wonder Trump's people are looking at him and saying, "Not in my country." One by one, the pieces of Khan's political career begin to fall into place for his critics. His portrayal of himself as a champion of diversity, it turns out, may not be as pure as it first appeared. What's really troubling, one critic continues, is not just his defense of Farrakhan, but his willingness to continue with these dangerous alliances. When you start defending people with such extreme views, how can you expect anyone to take your rhetoric on diversity seriously? But even as the attack on Khan intensifies, the question remains, what next for London? Can the city reclaim its former identity, or is it already too far gone under Khan's leadership? The critics are divided, but one thing is clear. For those who find themselves on the political opposite side, this is not just a matter of politics. It's a matter of the future of a city that has long been a symbol of British pride. As for Khan, he remains steadfast in his beliefs, unwavering in his rhetoric. Whether that will be enough to secure his political future remains to be seen. But for now, Londoners are left to decide whether they want a mayor who promises diversity or one who can deliver safety, unity, and a future that feels more inclusive for all. As the evening sets in over London, the city's iconic skyline stands tall, but beneath that shining exterior, a growing unease has begun to take root. The streets, once a symbol of freedom and the beating heart of a proud nation, have started to show signs of wear. The laughter of the past, echoing through the pubs and crowded markets, is now overshadowed by the cries for help that seem to go unnoticed. The infamous streets of London, with their centuries-old history and their reputation for being a safe haven for all walks of life, are rapidly becoming a battleground, as crime rates soar under Mayor Sadiq Khan's leadership. You know, it's a bit rich in it, one seasoned Londoner remarks, shaking his head as he sips his pint at a local pub. You've got Khan out there, blabbering on about how he's making London safer, yet I can't walk 10 steps without wondering if someone's going to try and nick my phone. I mean, what's going on with that? His mate, an ex-copper who's seen it all, looks up from his drink, his eyes narrowing in frustration. Right, and you know what's even worse? The police. They're not even doing their job. They're too busy chasing tweets and posts on social media. Who gives a toss about what some random blokes said on the internet when people are getting mugged on our streets? The other man laughs bitterly. It's a bloody joke, that's what it is. You've got real crime going on, and all they care about is making sure no one offends anyone on Twitter. What happened to good old-fashioned policing, The sort where you actually go out and stop a bloody robbery. Their conversation echoes the growing sense of betrayal felt by many Londoners, who once felt a deep pride in their city's legacy. A city that, for centuries, stood as a symbol of liberty, culture, and opportunity. But now, that image is beginning to crumble. People, once proud to walk through London streets, now do so with a sense of wariness. The very fabric of the city's identity is being questioned, as the government's policies seem to focus less on the needs of its citizens and more on political correctness and rhetoric. "I used to love this city, mate," says another voice from across the table, a woman in her late 30s, her face etched with concern. "But lately, I just don't feel safe anymore. The police. Don't get me started. They'd rather investigate a bloke's Facebook post than bother with what's really going on. It's like the city's been abandoned by the very people meant to protect us." Her friend nods solemnly, a knowing look on his face. "Yeah, it's like they've got no backbone left. I mean, back in the day, the cops were out on the beat. You could count on them. Now, all you see are officers in offices, dealing with what they call thought crimes. What's next? Are they going to police my opinions next? A nervous laugh escapes from one of the group, but it's laced with a bitter truth. The situation is no longer a laughing matter. The city's police force, once regarded as one of the most reliable in the world, now seems to have lost its focus. Instead of dealing with rising crime, it has turned its attention to regulating speech, monitoring social media, and ensuring that no one crosses the delicate line of what is deemed acceptable by today's standards. It's madness in it, the former officer pipes up again. You've got proper criminals out there, running riot, and the police are obsessed with making sure no one says anything offensive. It's like the tail's wagging the dog. How does that make any sense? Indeed, how does it make sense? London, the very capital that once prided itself on being a melting pot of cultures, now stands on the brink of losing its soul. It has become a city of contradictions, where the very idea of diversity is thrown about like a buzzword, yet the safety of its citizens is increasingly in jeopardy. The streets that were once a symbol of free speech and movement have now become increasingly unsafe, as the leadership seems more focused on appeasing global political agendas than on securing the city's future. As the debate rages on in the pub, the conversation inevitably turns to the larger question: how much longer can London remain the beating heart of British identity? Once a shining example of freedom and multiculturalism, has the city now been reduced to a shadow of its former self? One man, an elderly gentleman who's lived in the city his entire life, leans forward and speaks softly but with conviction. You know, I never thought I'd see the day when I'd be ashamed of my own city. But here we are. It's not the London I grew up in, that's for sure. The question is, are we just going to sit back and watch it all go down the drain? The room falls silent, and for a moment, even the chatter of the nearby tables seems to fade. It's a question that resonates deeply, not just with this group of locals, but with millions of Londoners who are grappling with the same reality. London is changing, and not necessarily for the better. The very ideals that once made the city great, freedom, safety, and inclusivity, are being eroded, replaced by an ideology that places political correctness above the well-being of its people. And then, as if to punctuate the growing sense of unease, the conversation turns international. The name Donald Trump, as divisive as ever, comes up once again. His influence, long a point of contention, has taken root in the debate over London's future. If it was up to Trump, one of the men says, Khan would be banned from entering the States, wouldn't he? And frankly, I wouldn't mind seeing that happen. Maybe it's time someone did something about this mess. The room nods in agreement, as the conversation shifts to the wider political stage. Trump's recent comments about Khan, his criticisms, and the notion of banning him from entering the United States have sent shockwaves through the British political system. But Trump, ever the polarizing figure, has become a symbol of resistance for many. His stance, his words, and his actions have resonated across the globe, creating an international debate that transcends borders. The political chaos, it seems, is not confined to London alone. As the night progresses, the group continues to discuss the issue at hand. Will Khan's divisive tactics ultimately lead to his downfall? Will London, under his leadership, continue to suffer as its citizens grow increasingly frustrated and disillusioned? Or will he somehow manage to hold on to power, even as the city's very identity continues to crumble around him? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: the battle for London's soul is far from over. As the group slowly finishes their drinks and prepares to leave, they know that the future of this great city is in jeopardy, and the struggle to reclaim it from the forces of division and decline is only just beginning. So, as we close today's discussion, we are reminded that in the world of politics, nothing is ever as it seems. The headlines may change, the players may shift, but the fight for the heart and soul of a nation remains constant. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and always be ready for the next twist in the story. Because, as they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same.